his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over. I can't believe you're a sick son of a bitch that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue.
He said he was going to do something. He did nothing. He talked about that this was evil. The only thing evil is what he continues to do to the people of this state.
That was Beto O'Rourke, the man now running for governor here in Texas against Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott and the two sitting Republican senators had come to Uvalde for a press conference when O'Rourke started screaming at them that they had not done enough about gun control and effectively blaming them for the shooting that happened here. We do not know right now enough facts to know what policies may or may not have prevented what happened behind me. 19 children killed and 2 teachers here in Uvalde. The shooter, 18-year-old Salvador Roma, was shot by Border Patrol agents who had responded to the all call for help and then run to the sound of gunfire behind me. President Biden will come here in the coming days. Yesterday, he struck a tone both of comforting America as a whole and then speaking very powerfully about gun control and the politicization of this issue and of this tragedy. Whether he will say that when he is here in Uvalde or not is yet to be seen. We bring in George Will, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and senior NewsNation political contributor. It's always good to see you. Is there anything now in America that will not be politicized, no matter how tragic, within 24 hours?
It is absolutely astonishing, Leland. The kind of person who slaughters his grandmother and slaughters fourth graders is either sick or wicked. And the law is really not made to control and deter the sick and the wicked. So the challenge for people like Beto O'Rourke and others is to try to write, how do we write a law that can prevent things like this? And this has frustrated people of good intelligence and goodwill for decades now. It is just astonishingly bad taste to bring your gubernatorial campaign to a press conference just hours, a day after this tragedy, and use it as a soapbox to advance yourself. Mr. O'Rourke, I think, made a political blunder and an act of execrable bad taste.
Yeah, you can't really understand that at some point. The governor and the senator spent about an hour talking about Salvatore Romas and what he did and the evil behind it and the mental illness issues and all the issues we usually hear about from Republicans when things like this happen. How are we in this situation, though, that for 80% of Americans, the idea of some type of additional gun control, whether it be expanded background checks, closing the gun show loophole, these sort of very basic things seem quite appealing. And yet Democrats will never compromise because they say it's either all or nothing, and Republicans will never compromise and give an inch. Thus, the rest of us in the middle are left with at least perhaps some tragedies that would have been preventable with those laws.
I think that's right. The single issue voters on gun control are against gun control. And the Democrats, as you say, want to have all or nothing, and the nothing they're willing to settle for because they still have the issue. Leland, let's look down the road till the end of June. At that time, at the end of the Supreme Court term, there's a case that suddenly, after Uvalde, acquires an enormous significance. The plaintiffs from New York have challenged the constitutionality of laws restricting the public carrying of weapons. The Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear arms. The Supreme Court could, in about 5 weeks, rule that most of the laws around the country, and every state has laws restricting in some way the public carrying of sidearms, most of those become constitutionally problematic. Now, in the aftermath of Uvalde, if an enormous number of Americans say, I'm not comfortable knowing that the people around me in a restaurant or in a department store are carrying arms, some people will say, yes, but we'd be safer and if other people had these weapons in situations like this. That's an arguable position, but most Americans don't feel that way. And so after Uvalde, this coming Supreme Court case on the public bearing of arms takes on a new significance.
What we're watching right now is sort of the very personal side of this from the very political. Another group of young children, certainly the age of those who were killed here, bringing flowers and balloons, handing them off to the Texas State Troopers to go over to the memorial in front of the elementary school. We'll keep watching that. But as any American who watches this scene and watches the continued coverage that we've talked about of crime in America and the continued violence in America, how does any political party square the circle of talking about dealing with America falling apart and the reality that the more America has these issues of crime and school shootings and the like, the more people want to arm themselves? We've just lost George Will's signal, which sometimes in these situations happen. One of the real challenges we're having here in this town of Uvalde is that as you come into town, as the media comes to town in this sort of enormous grouping of people, it overwhelms the city in so many ways, and certainly puts this footprint here that we become a big part of this story. And in ways we have to tell the story of what's happened. You have to tell it through the eyes of the people who are experiencing the emotion, but at the same time, you overwhelm the town. One of the ways you overwhelm them is the cell phone signals and the way that we transmit our signal to you, which is part of the issue we're having right now. Head to break. When we come back, Lieutenant Chris Oliveris of the Texas Department of Public Safety. Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.